The moment my sons-in-laws laughed at me in front of everyone was the moment I knew I would no longer protect them from the truth. I arrived at the wedding early, not because I was eager, but because I have always believed that arriving early is a sign of respect. The venue was overwhelming, even before the guests filled it. Polished floors reflected the ceiling lights, like still water. Tall floral arrangements lined the entrance, white and gold, carefully designed to signal wealth before a single word was spoken. Everything about the place whispered that people like me were not expected to stay long. I wore my only suit, the same dark one I had worn to funerals, job interviews, and my son's college graduation. It fit me well enough, though the fabric had softened with age. I had pressed it myself that morning, my hands steady, my thoughts quiet. I did not feel embarrassed walking in. I felt proud. My son was getting married. That should have been enough. An usher glanced at my name on the card and hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Then she smiled politely and led me away from the front tables, past the immediate family, past the people whose laughter rang a little too loud. We stopped near the edge of the room, close to a service door that opened and closed as staff passed through. Steam and the smell of food drifted in with each swing. She pointed to a chair. "This is your seat, sir." I looked at the table number. It was the highest number in the room. Around me sat distant acquaintances, plus ones, people who clearly did not belong anywhere else either. I thanked her and sat down without complaint. I had spent most of my life sitting where I was told. It was not new to me. From where I sat, I could see everything. The head table was raised slightly, just enough to make sure attention stayed there. My son stood out, even among the well-dressed crowd. He looked nervous but happy, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. When his eyes found mine across the room, he smiled. That smile alone made the long walk worth it. The bride stood beside him, radiant, perfectly composed. Her parents sat nearby, relaxed in a way only people who believe they own the room can be. Her father laughed often, leaning back in his chair, surveying the guests like an inspector. Her mother nodded along, approving, her eyes sharp. As more guests arrived, I began to notice the glances. Some were curious, some were dismissive. A few lingered just long enough to assess my shoes, my hands, my posture. I kept my gaze forward. I have learned that if you give people nothing, they will invent stories on their own. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Words about love, unity, and family echoed through the hall, hollow in a way I could not yet explain. Applause rose and fell on cue. Glasses clinked. Music swelled. Then came the speeches. The bride's father stood first. He took the microphone with confidence, tapping it lightly, as if testing ownership. The room quieted instantly. He smiled, waiting for the attention to settle. He spoke about legacy, about standards, about how proud he was that his daughter had chosen well. His words were smooth, practiced. Then his tone shifted. He spoke about how far my son had come, how remarkable it was that someone from such modest beginnings could rise so high. Laughter rippled gently through the room. He gestured vaguely toward the back, toward me, without saying my name. He spoke about anchors, about how some people spend their lives trying to escape where they came from. He joked about old habits, old clothes, old mindsets that never quite leave. The laughter grew louder this time. I felt every eye turn. I did not look down. I did not look away. I sat very still, my hands folded on the table, my breathing slow. I had been insulted before in my life. This was not the worst, but it was the most public. What hurt was not the words. It was the ease with which they were spoken, the comfort of knowing no one would challenge him. I looked at my son. His smile had vanished. His jaw was tight. For a moment, our eyes met again. I wanted to shake my head, to tell him to let it go. I did not want this day to become a wound he carried forever. The speech ended to applause. People raised their glasses. The music resumed. I stood up quietly. I did not rush. I did not look around for permission. I simply pushed my chair in and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. Most did not even notice. The service door opened again, warm air brushing my face as I passed. As I stepped outside into the cool night, the noise faded behind me. I did not feel anger. I felt clarity. Inside that hall, surrounded by money and noise, they had mistaken silence for weakness. They had no idea what they had just invited into their lives. I did not go far after I left the hall. I walked until the noise softened, until the laughter became a distant echo instead of a blade. Outside, the night air was cool and steady, the kind that forces your lungs to slow down whether you want them to or not. I stood near the edge of the building where the light from inside spilled out in a pale rectangle on the ground. I stayed there, half in shadow, half in view, because a father never truly leaves when his child is still inside. I thought about the first time I held my son. He was small, fragile, his fingers curling instinctively around mine as if he already understood the concept of holding on. His mother had been tired, smiling weakly, trusting me without question. That trust stayed with me long after she was gone. Every decision I made after that day carried his weight. Through the glass doors, I could see movement, shapes shifting too fast for comfort. The rhythm of the wedding had changed. The smooth flow of celebration had fractured into sharp gestures and rigid postures. Something was happening. The doors opened abruptly. Voices spilled out, tense and hurried. I recognized my son's voice immediately. Not the confident tone he used at work, not the polite one he used in public, but the raw edge he rarely allowed anyone to hear. She said it was just a joke. That was her voice, clipped, irritated more than concerned. I heard my son reply, his words low but firm. He asked how humiliation could ever be a joke. He asked why no one stopped it. Why no one defended me. There was a pause, the kind that tells you the answer is not coming. I stepped slightly closer, still unseen. She told him he was overreacting. She reminded him of the guests, of appearances, of what people would think. She told him that tonight was about them, not about an old man who should understand his place. Old man, I closed my eyes. My son said my name then, not loudly, not angrily. He said it the way he used to when he was a boy, when he was hurt and needed reassurance. That sound did something to me. It split open a place I had kept sealed for years. The argument grew sharper. Her parents joined in, their voices layered with authority and entitlement. They spoke as if my son were an investment that had momentarily malfunctioned. They reminded him of connections, of favors, of how much had been arranged on his behalf. I waited for him to back down. Part of me expected it, not because he was weak, but because I knew the cost of standing up in rooms like that. I had paid it before. Then I heard a chair scrape hard against the floor. The room went quiet. My son's voice carried through the open doors, steady but strained. He said he would not marry into a family that measured worth by bloodlines and bank accounts. He said love without respect was a transaction, not a promise. Someone gasped. Someone laughed nervously. He said the wedding was over. For a brief moment, I could not move. I stood frozen between pride and fear. Pride that he had chosen dignity. Fear of what that choice would take from him. The doors burst open again, this time violently. Guests spilled out in clusters, whispering, staring, avoiding eye contact. Then my son stepped outside. He looked smaller than he had minutes ago. Not physically, but emotionally, like something essential had been torn loose. His tie was crooked. His hands were shaking. When he saw me, his face collapsed. "I am sorry, Dad." That was all he said. I did not ask him to explain. I did not ask what he had done. I pulled him into my arms the way I had when he was a child waking from nightmares. He leaned into me without resistance, his forehead pressing into my shoulder. I felt his breath hitch once, then again. "You did nothing wrong," I said quietly. We walked away together, past the valet stand, past the polished cars that no longer impressed either of us. No one tried to stop us. No one knew what to say. We got into my car. It was old, reliable, unremarkable. The engine started on the first try. As we drove, the lights of the venue receded in the mirror, shrinking until they looked no different from any other building. My son stared out the window, his jaw clenched and unclenched, like he was trying to swallow something too large. "They are going to destroy me," he said finally. "I lost my job. I lost her. I lost everything in one night." I kept my eyes on the road. "No," I said. "You lost an illusion." He turned toward me, confused, exhausted. I did not explain. Not yet. That night was not the end of his life. It was the moment the lie finally broke. And lies, once broken, have a way of revealing who has been standing on solid ground all along. We did not go back to my house right away. I drove past it once, then kept going, as if I needed a few more miles of darkness to prepare myself. My son did not ask where we were going. He sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by long stretches of road and silence. I pulled over at a small overlook just off the highway. There was nothing special about it. A cracked railing, a bench with peeling paint, the kind of place people pass without noticing. I turned off the engine. The quiet settled between us, heavy but necessary. "You want to know why they treated me like that?" I said. He nodded slowly. "It is because I let them." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if trying to reconcile the man he had just defended with the one he had known all his life. To him, I was predictable. I worked. I came home. I fixed what broke. I never talked about money unless there was not enough of it. I never talked about the past at all. I told him about the years after his mother died. How grief had taught me that noise attracts attention, and attention attracts damage. I told him about my first business, how I built it quietly, sold it quietly, and learned what kind of people suddenly appeared when success became visible. People who smiled too much. People who asked the wrong questions. "So I learned to disappear," I said. I explained that wealth, when exposed, becomes a target. That real power does not sit at the head of the table. It watches the table from a distance and waits. I had spent decades building structures designed to survive arrogance, greed, and time itself. No signs, no plaques, no interviews. He asked me why I never told him. "Because I wanted you to grow up free," I said. Free from expectation. Free from entitlement. Free from thinking you were better than anyone else just because of my name. He leaned back against the seat, absorbing that. His face held disbelief, but also something else. Anger, maybe, or regret. I took out my phone then. It was not new or impressive, just a tool. I scrolled through a list of contacts that were not labeled with names. I stepped out of the car while he stayed inside. The call lasted less than a minute. I did not raise my voice. I did not give explanations. I issued instructions that had been prepared years in advance. Certain holdings were to be reviewed. Certain lines of credit were to be examined. Nothing aggressive, nothing illegal, just the truth applied all at once. When I returned to the car, my son was watching me as if I had become a stranger. "What did you do?" he asked. "I corrected a misunderstanding," I said. He waited for more. But I gave him none. Instead, I told him about the bride's family. Not their names, not their titles, but their habits. How people who mock others often live on borrowed ground. How generosity is usually replaced by leverage in families like that. I had noticed it the moment I saw their financial structure explained casually at dinner weeks before. Layers of debt disguised as expansion. Confidence built on constant applause. "They built fast," I said. "That is always a warning." We drove the rest of the way home in silence. When we arrived, he followed me inside like a guest, unsure of his welcome. The house was modest, familiar. Nothing had changed. I poured us both water and sat at the table where he had once done homework. "You are not ruined," I told him. "You are exposed. There is a difference. He laughed once, bitterly. They are already calling me unstable. Her father threatened to bury me in court. I nodded. I had expected that. Let them, I said. He stared at me, eyes wide. You do not understand how powerful they are. I met his gaze. I understand exactly how fragile they are. I explained that arrogance makes people sloppy. That when someone believes they own a room, they stop locking the doors. Everything they had built depended on momentum. Momentum collapses when questioned. Before he could respond, my phone vibrated softly on the table. Then again and again. I did not answer. Not yet. By morning, I said quietly, the people who laughed tonight will be asking questions they never prepared to hear answered. He swallowed hard. Are you going to destroy them? I shook my head. No. I am going to stop protecting them from the consequences of who they really are. Outside, the night remained calm. Inside, something ancient had shifted. The life I never spoke about had finally stepped forward, and it was already moving. The retaliation did not wait for morning. My phone began to ring before the sky had even decided what color it wanted to be. Messages first, then calls, numbers I did not recognize, voices that spoke as if they already owned the outcome. I did not answer. I made coffee. I watched my son sit at the table, staring at his hands like they no longer belonged to him. By mid-morning, the first accusation appeared online. It was subtle at first, a carefully worded post suggesting that my son had suffered a breakdown under pressure. A sympathetic tone wrapped around a quiet warning. By noon, the language sharpened. He was unstable, volatile, emotionally unsafe. People who had toasted him hours earlier now shared concern as if it were fact. By afternoon, he lost his job. No explanation. Just a short call from someone who sounded uncomfortable but relieved to be done with it. Reputational risk. Temporary suspension. We will be in touch. They never are. My son stood in the doorway when I told him. He did not shout. He did not argue. He nodded once, as if a final piece had clicked into place. I told you, he said quietly. They are destroying me. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find them standing on my porch, the bride's parents. No smiles, no pretense. They stepped inside without waiting to be invited, their confidence filling the room like smoke. Her father spoke first. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He told my son that this could still be fixed, that apologies could be arranged, that stories could be rewritten. He spoke like a man offering mercy. Her mother circled the room, eyes scanning the furniture, the walls, the silence. She stopped in front of me. You embarrassed us, she said. And now your son is paying for it. I did not respond. Her father turned back to my son. He told him that reputations could be erased, careers ended, that people like them had reach. He suggested a settlement, a financial gesture, something symbolic to smooth things over. My son looked at me, waiting. I shook my head slightly. We are not paying for your behavior, I said. That was when the tone changed. The bride stepped forward then, eyes red, voice trembling in a way that would have convinced anyone who did not know better. She accused my son of emotional cruelty, of abandonment. She said she was afraid of him. The words were rehearsed. I could hear it in the rhythm. Then she paused, and she said she was pregnant. The room went very still. My son froze. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if the air itself had thickened. Her parents watched us carefully, measuring the impact. This was not desperation. This was strategy. She said the stress had been unbearable, that she had tried to be understanding, that she needed support now. Financial support, protection, privacy. Her father explained that, if handled properly, this could all disappear. If not, it would become very public. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear, certainty. They left shortly after, satisfied they had delivered a killing blow. The door closed behind them, and the house fell silent again. My son sank into a chair. His hands shook violently now. "I did not know," he said. "I swear I did not know." I believed him. I placed a hand on his shoulder and waited until his breathing slowed. "Listen to me," I said. "Do not say a word to anyone. Not to them. Not online. Not to your friends." He looked up at me, eyes wild. "They are going to ruin me. They are going to tell everyone I abandoned a pregnant woman." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what they are going to try to do." That night, the accusations escalated. Articles appeared. Anonymous sources spoke. The story took shape without facts, fed by confidence and repetition. My son became a villain in a narrative he had not written. I watched it unfold without interrupting. Instead, I began to gather timelines, records, patterns. I reviewed dates and movements. I listened more than I spoke. Every lie leaves a shadow. Every performance has seams. By the end of the night, I knew something was wrong with their story. And I knew something else. They believed they had finally cornered us. They believed fear would force us to kneel. What they did not understand was that desperation makes people careless. And careless people leave evidence behind. They had come for my son. Now I was done waiting. The lie did not frighten me. It offended me. I had spent most of my life watching people bluff with confidence, and this was the loudest bluff I had ever seen. A pregnancy announced at the perfect moment. Tears, measured carefully. Threats delivered through sympathetic language. It was not emotion. It was timing. My son barely slept that night. He sat on the edge of the couch long after midnight, his shoulders hunched forward, replaying every moment of the past months as if the truth might reveal itself through exhaustion. I let him unravel. Sometimes, clarity only arrives after the panic burns itself out. In the morning, I began quietly. I did not confront them. I did not deny anything publicly. Silence unsettles liars more than outrage ever could. Instead, I started mapping time. Dates, movements, absences. I asked my son simple questions, not accusatory, just precise. When was the last time you were alone with her? How long? Where? What came next? His answers were steady, consistent, honest. The timeline did not fit. I requested records through channels that do not leave trails. Medical appointment windows, travel logs, digital footprints people forget exist when they believe themselves untouchable. Nothing invasive, just patterns. Patterns always betray the truth. By the third day, the story had holes wide enough to fall through. The pregnancy announcement had come too early for the symptoms she claimed. The dates overlapped with weeks. My son was not even in the same country. Messages she had sent him during that time were cold, distant, transactional. There was no anticipation, no fear, no joy, only leverage. Then there was the man she thought no one noticed. A fitness consultant. Present at more events than coincidence allows. Paid discreetly through layered accounts. Frequent private meetings disguised as training sessions. I did not need names. I needed confirmation. I got it. The child was not my son's. When I told him, he did not react the way I expected. There was no explosion of anger, no relief. He simply sat very still, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if something fragile inside him had finally stopped resisting. "I feel stupid," he said quietly. I shook my head. "You feel human," I replied. He asked me why I was not already ending it, why I was not exposing them immediately. He wanted the truth out, clean and loud, like a fire that would force everyone to look. I told him no. "Truth is not a weapon you swing blindly," I said. "It is a blade you place carefully." They were not finished yet. I could feel it. People who lie this far do not retreat when challenged. They double down, they push harder, and in doing so, they reveal everything. So we waited. As expected, the demands escalated. Money first, then conditions, silence clauses, public apologies. They wanted my son to admit fault for things that never happened. They wanted control. The former bride sent messages late at night. alternating between pleading and threatening. She spoke of the child as if it were a bargaining chip, not a life. Every word tightened the knot around her own story. Her parents followed with legal notices drafted aggressively but sloppily. They assumed fear would rush us into mistakes. They underestimated patience. I saved everything. Each message, each contradiction, each careless overreach. My son struggled. There were moments he wanted to run, to give them whatever they wanted, just to make it stop. I did not blame him. This kind of pressure breaks good people. But I reminded him of something important. They believe they are winning, I said. That is why they are getting sloppy. And they were. They spoke too openly to the wrong people. They reused lies without aligning details. They assumed the story would never be challenged because it never had been before. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. Proof strong enough to end the lie. Strong enough to end them. But I did nothing. Not yet. Because the most dangerous moment for someone who thinks they are in control is the moment just before they realize they are not. And I intended to let them reach that moment fully. In their confidence, they crossed a line they could not step back from. They pushed too far, and when they did, the truth stopped being patient. They reached out 3 days later, not with apologies, not with restraint, with an invitation. A message arrived from her father's assistant, written in language so polite it was almost insulting. A private dinner, a chance to de-escalate, a discussion between reasonable adults. The location was an exclusive restaurant known for discretion and loyalty to powerful clients. They believed control was returning to their hands. I accepted immediately. I did not tell my son where I was going. I told him only that tonight would be uncomfortable and that he must trust me. He looked at me the way he had as a child when I asked him to step into the dark before turning on the light. Afraid, but willing. I arrived early, not as a guest. I entered through the service corridor, wearing a plain jacket, my posture slightly bent, my head lowered just enough to be overlooked. No one questioned me. In rooms like that, people do not see what they do not value. I took a position near the back, close enough to hear, far enough to be ignored. They arrived exactly on time. Her parents first, confident, composed. Then her, calm, calculated. She wore sorrow the way some people wear jewelry, adjusting it depending on who was watching. They sat at the best table, naturally. The staff moved quickly around them. Their conversation began softly, but arrogance always grows louder when it feels safe. They spoke openly about strategy, about how public opinion had already turned, about how the narrative was set. Her father laughed when he mentioned my son's name. He said the boy would come crawling back soon. That fear always corrects behavior. Her mother spoke about settlements, about how much it would cost us to make this disappear. She said pregnancy stories were powerful tools when handled properly. I listened. I let them finish their drinks. Then I made my call, not from my phone. From memory. The effect was not immediate. It never is. Collapse begins quietly. A hesitation. A pause. A furrowed brow. Her father checked his phone once. Then again. His smile tightened. He excused himself briefly, returning with irritation replacing confidence. He whispered to his wife. She frowned. Within minutes, the tone at the table shifted. A server approached them carefully. Their card had been declined. Her father laughed it off at first. Tried another. Then another. All declined. He demanded explanations. The manager arrived. Apologetic but firm. There appeared to be a temporary issue with their accounts. Temporary. Her mother's phone began vibrating. Messages. Alerts. She read one, then another. Her face drained of color. Her father stood up, voice raised now, no longer measured. He demanded answers no one could give him. I remained where I was. Around them, the restaurant continued as if nothing had changed. Conversations flowed. Glasses clinked. No one cared about their panic. Then the checks arrived. I paid for every table in the room. Every table except theirs. The manager announced it politely. A courtesy from an anonymous patron. Applause followed. Smiles. Gratitude. At their table, silence. Her father realized then that this was not coincidence. That this was not a glitch. That someone unseen was inside their walls. He scanned the room desperately, his eyes passing over me, without recognition. They left in a hurry. No dignity, no farewell. Fear does that to people who are used to being feared. I waited until they were gone before stepping forward. I left the same way I had entered. Unnoticed. Unchallenged. When I got home, my son was waiting. "Did you do something?" he asked. I poured myself a glass of water. I reminded them who they were dealing with, I said. Outside, the night was calm. Inside their world, the ground had started to give way. They would spend the next hours trying to understand what had happened. They would not sleep. And by the time morning came, they would realize the dinner had not been an invitation. It had been a warning, and it was the last one they were going to receive. The lawsuit arrived 2 mornings later, thick with confidence and thin with truth. It accused my son of abandonment, emotional cruelty, and financial harm. The number on the cover page was designed to intimidate. It was large. It always is when people believe size equals strength. My son read the first page and stopped. His hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. He had reached the point where the body refuses to carry panic any longer. I told him he would represent himself. He looked at me as if I had asked him to walk into a storm without shelter. "They want to break me," he said. "They have lawyers. They have influence." I nodded. "That is exactly why you will speak for yourself," I said. Truth is harder to drown when it is spoken plainly. The courtroom was cold in the way expensive places often are. Polished wood, neutral colors, an air of controlled authority. Her parents sat together on one side, composed, whispering confidently to their legal team. She sat behind them, eyes lowered, hands folded over her stomach in a practiced gesture of vulnerability. They did not look at me. I sat alone in the back row. No suit that signaled power, no entourage. Just a quiet man, with his hands resting on his knees. To them, I was already irrelevant. The proceedings began exactly as I expected. Their lawyers spoke first. They painted a careful picture of my son as unstable and reckless. They spoke of emotional damage, of promises broken, of a pregnant woman abandoned without care. They spoke with rehearsed sympathy, glancing occasionally toward the judge to ensure the story was landing. When my son stood, the room shifted. He spoke slowly. He did not attack. He did not defend. He told the story as it happened. Without decoration, the insults, the public humiliation, the decision to leave, the threats that followed. His voice wavered once, then steadied. He did not ask for mercy. He asked for truth. The judge listened. Then they called me. There was a ripple of surprise when my name was read. I stood and walked forward at the same unhurried pace I had used all my life. I felt eyes on me then, assessing, dismissing. I took the stand. Their lawyer smiled as he approached. He asked simple questions first. My occupation, my income, my relationship to the groom. I answered honestly but briefly. He leaned in, confident. "And you expect this court to believe you are capable of influencing any of this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the case. I looked at him calmly. "I expect this court to see what is true," I said. The smile faltered. I asked permission to submit evidence. The judge agreed. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I presented records, ownership documents, financial instruments, layered so deeply they had never been questioned. I explained how control does not always look like command. Sometimes it looks like silence. The room changed. Whispers started. The opposing legal team began flipping through pages too quickly. Their confidence drained in real time. Then I addressed the pregnancy. I laid out the timeline. The travel records, the medical inconsistencies, the messages. Finally, the confirmation. Clear, verified, undeniable. The child was not my son's. Her lawyer objected weakly. The judge overruled. The truth does not require permission. Her face collapsed, not into tears, into something worse, recognition. Her parents began arguing quietly with their own counsel. One of the lawyers stood and requested a recess. The judge denied it. Then I spoke directly to them for the first time. "You laughed at me," I said evenly. "You believed that because I did not announce myself. I did not exist. You used lies as weapons because you assumed no one would challenge you." I paused. "You were wrong." The judge reviewed the documents in silence. The room waited. When the ruling came, it was swift. The case was dismissed, not postponed. Not negotiated, dismissed. The judge cited bad faith, fabrication, abuse of process. He referred the matter for further review. Their legal team withdrew on the spot. Her father stood up, red-faced, shouting about misunderstandings and conspiracies. The bailiff warned him once. Then twice. I watched him sit back down, smaller than he had ever appeared. My son exhaled for the first time in days. As we left the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with disbelief. Reporters gathered. Questions flew. I did not answer any of them. Outside, the light was harsh and honest. My son stopped and looked at me. "You could have ended this earlier," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yes, why didn't you?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because some lessons only last when people watch themselves fall," I said. Behind us, the people who once laughed were being escorted into a reality they had never prepared for. And for the first time, they saw me. Not as a poor old man, but as the man who had been standing there all along. They just never thought to look. The days after the ruling were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic apologies, no sudden confessions. Power rarely begs when it falls. It retreats into denial, then into silence. Their names faded from conversations first, then from invitations, then from relevance. The world they had curated for decades did not collapse with a sound. It simply stopped responding to them. Their assets were reviewed. Their leverage vanished. Partnerships dissolved politely. Doors that once opened without knocking remained closed, no matter how hard they tried. The estate they had flaunted as proof of superiority was no longer theirs to command. It passed into new hands, repurposed not as a trophy, but as a place that served people who had never been invited to their tables. My former daughter-in-law disappeared from public view. The story she tried to sell no longer had buyers. Sympathy evaporates when truth arrives intact. I did not follow her life after that. I did not need to. Consequences do not require witnesses to be effective. My son took longer to recover. There were mornings he woke up convinced the ground would drop again. Trauma does that. It teaches the body to expect impact even when the danger has passed. I did not rush him. I made coffee. I listened. I reminded him that rebuilding is not a race. It is a practice. He found work slowly. Not through favors, through effort. He chose environments that valued clarity over spectacle. People noticed. Trust returned in small increments. One recommendation led to another. He stood straighter. He slept better. He laughed again, cautiously at first, then freely. One evening, months later, he asked me why I had chosen such a quiet life when I could have lived loudly. I told him that loud lives attract the wrong teachers. Silence taught me patience. It taught me restraint. It taught me how to see people as they are when they believe no one important is watching. I returned to my routines unchanged. The same house, the same chair by the window, the same early mornings. Wealth did not improve my days. It never had. It only gave me the ability to decide when to act and when to wait. I thought often about that night at the wedding, about the laughter, about how easily people confuse confidence with worth. They had believed the room belonged to them because no one challenged them. They had mistaken noise for strength and appearances for truth. They were not cruel because they were powerful. They were cruel because they believed power excused it. My son came by one afternoon carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me and sat down across from me the way he used to when he was younger, before the world complicated him. "I see it now," he said. "They were never better than you. They were just louder." I smiled. "That is how it usually works." He asked me if I felt satisfied. I considered the question carefully. I did not feel victorious. Victory implies competition. I did not feel vengeful. Revenge requires anger, and anger had never guided me well. I felt finished. Finished protecting people who mistook kindness for weakness. Finished shrinking so others could feel tall. Finished believing that dignity must be defended with volume. The lesson my son carried forward was not about money or power. It was about discernment. About choosing integrity when humiliation offers shortcuts. About understanding that the quietest person in the room may simply be the one with nothing left to prove. As for me, I learned something too. Silence is powerful, but it is not endless. There comes a moment when silence becomes permission, and permission becomes damage. Knowing when to speak is just as important as knowing when to wait. That night at the wedding, they laughed at a man they thought was insignificant. They never understood that significance does not announce itself. It watches. It remembers. And when it finally moves, it does so without needing applause. That is what remained after their power was gone, and it was more than enough.